I'm going to tell you something I spent 30 years avoiding saying out loud, and maybe you'll think I'm exaggerating or that my memory has gotten weak with time. But before you judge, answer me this. What would you do if you found, in the most isolated place on Earth, something that knew how to imitate a human being without ever having seen one? Because that's what happened to me in the winter of 1991 in Antarctica, a place where nothing moves without being recorded, where every step on the ice leaves a mark, where the silence is so deep you can hear your own heart beating inside your jacket. And even so, that night, I heard footsteps that couldn't be there, footsteps that left no trail, footsteps that matched my rhythm. And then came the voice. It wasn't a colleague, it wasn't the radio, it wasn't the wind blowing through the metal of the station. It was a voice trying to form my name, as if it were learning how to pronounce each syllable for the first time. And there was something wrong with it, something that didn't come from the earth or from the cold or from any living thing I knew. And that's why, even now, so many years later, my hands still tremble when I remember. I arrived at Bird Station at the end of May 1991 when winter had already swallowed everything. It wasn't my first season in Antarctica, but this one felt different. There were only a few of us, 6 researchers in total, divided between deep ice studies, climate, and atmospheric monitoring. The routine there was mathematical: wake up, measure, record, fix whatever broke, repeat it all the next day. The kind of discipline that makes your mind run on autopilot just to stop the isolation from turning into a hole you slide into without noticing. The station itself wasn't big. A central corridor, 3 main modules, steel platforms always creaking under extreme cold. Every breath inside the helmet created a thin mist that froze on the visor if you stayed still too long. Everything there existed to remind you that you don't belong in that place. Inside, though, our interactions were almost light. Letters, card games, conversations about hot food and normal life. And everyone followed one silent rule. Don't talk about the late hours, about the strange sound that sometimes cut through the metal walls when the wind stopped, about that feeling that someone was beside you, watching, when you walked alone between the sensors 40 meters from the station. I worked in the external, atmospheric collection module. That meant I had to leave earlier than the others and come back later. At first, it didn't bother me. I've always liked routine and silence, but that winter, the darkness was thicker than usual. The feeling of being alone felt different, like the horizon was hiding something that didn't want to be seen. There was also one detail I only noticed days later. The instrument started recording small, magnetic fluctuations at specific times, always in the early hours. Fluctuations with no apparent source, no climate model explained them. Faulty equipment didn't either. And even so, every morning I'd find the devices too clean, with no sign of built-up ice, as if something had passed by and cleared them. I tried not to think too much about it. Antarctica is lonely enough as it is, but there were nights when I woke up with the clear feeling that I wasn't alone in the module, not because of noise, but because of the silence, a silence so deep it felt like the air was being divided by another presence that left no trace. The first signs didn't come as a jump scare. They came as small interruptions in what was supposed to be constant. In Antarctica, everything follows a pattern. The repetitive ticking of metal structures, the hum of the generator, the wind pushing fine snow against the walls. When something breaks that pattern, you notice immediately. The first strange thing was the sound of footsteps on the ice. I was walking back from the atmospheric module around 2 in the morning, moving slowly because of low visibility. Halfway there, I heard footsteps behind me. The echo was clear, steady, perfectly in sync with my own. I thought it was one of my colleagues coming to help, so I turned around to greet them, but there was no one. Just the darkness, cut by my headlamp, and the wind blowing lightly. The kind of scene where any presence should leave clear prints in the snow, and there were none besides mine. The next day, one of the internal doors was open. That door was at the back of the lab, and no one had any reason to go there. It led nowhere useful, just to a small compartment with old spare parts. I closed it without thinking much, but the next day, it was open again, with the latch lifted, as if it had been handled carefully. Then came the noises inside the station, a kind of slow metallic scratching, different from any vibration caused by the cold. Sometimes it sounded like long fingers dragging along the outer hull. Other times it came from inside, from an impossible point, directly behind a wall with no access. And then something happened that truly made me stop. One early morning, while I was reviewing data, I heard someone say my name. Low, a bit rough, but pronounced in the exact way my mother used when she wanted my attention without scaring me. Only my mother was thousands of kilometers away. And at that moment, everyone in the station was asleep, each in their bunk on the opposite side of the corridor. I stayed perfectly still for almost a minute. Then I stood up, walked to the door, and looked through the small window. Nothing, just darkness and the leather-black Antarctic night. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, and maybe I would have believed that, if not for what happened the next day. I found footprints beside the external module. Human footprints, too long, too deep, and, what shook me the most, in a straight line, as if the body didn't need to move hips or knees to walk. After the footprints, everything changed. Even the air felt different. Antarctica has always been silent, but during that period the silence became a warning, like the environment itself was trying to tell me it wasn't safe to walk alone. The closeness of that thing didn't start as an attack. It started as observation. That week, I began to feel something I had never felt there before. The impression that someone was walking beside me, matching my pace exactly, but making no sound. I'd stop. The step stopped. I'd breathe deeply. The air around me seemed to hold its breath too. The first time I noticed it clearly was on a walk to the instrumentation tower, about 50 meters from the station. Halfway there, I felt a displacement of air on my left, as if something had taken a long step right there. I didn't hear anything, didn't see anything, but that movement, so subtle, so impossible, made my whole body freeze. And it wasn't the cold. I already knew the cold. This was something else. Later, inside the station, the imitation began. First, small sounds, a breathing pattern that didn't match any of my colleagues, a short throat clear that sounded almost human, but hollow. Then came nights when I woke with the clear sensation that someone was standing by my cabin. No sound, just presence. The peak came when I heard the voice again, but this time it tried to say more than my name. It tried to form sentences, it tried to repeat my English, but something was wrong, off, misaligned, like it was copying without understanding meaning. The voice said disconnected words, broken rhythms like something imitating phonemes it had heard only once. Is here, you, cold. It wasn't English, it wasn't anything. It was an attempt to fit human sounds into a mouth that wasn't made for them. At that point, I started leaving the radio on at night, not for communication, but just to have some human sound around me, until one of the guys said something that knocked the air out of my lungs. "You've been talking to yourself, huh? Last night I heard you whispering in the corridor." I hadn't left my bunk that night, and that's when I understood what was happening. The thing wasn't just trying to imitate, it was trying to interact. It wasn't a hunter waiting to pounce. It was an observer, a learner, and for some reason I never understood, it had chosen me. I needed to find an explanation, any explanation, before my mind fell apart. And to be honest, back then I was still trying to think like a scientist. Magnetic fluctuations, footsteps without footprints, voices with no source. Maybe it was all a consequence of isolation, environmental stress, nights that were too short and too long at the same time. At least that's what I kept telling myself while I logged data, that deep down, I knew didn't explain anything. I spoke to the team leader on a grey morning. I didn't tell him everything, of course. I just mentioned hearing strange sounds and feeling the lab door shake a few times. He laughed, patted my shoulder and told me to get more sleep. But before walking away, he said a sentence that stuck in my head. Out here, everybody hears something, but only a few listen too much. That's when I realized no one there wanted to face what was happening, and maybe that's why I felt more and more watched. The more the others ignored it, the more that thing seemed to focus on me. One especially silent night, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I went to the external module alone without telling anyone and left one of the field microphones out in the open. I wanted to capture sounds. I wanted proof. I don't know if it was courage or desperation, but it was something I had to do. I went back to the station and let the recorder run until morning. When I finally went to listen to it, my hands were as cold as ice even before I hit play, because deep down I already knew what would be there, and it was. First, the wind, then absolute silence, and then footsteps, very slow, very controlled, footsteps that didn't compress the snow. Next, my voice, trying to repeat my name, trying to say, "You hear me," like it was a test, a first attempt at contact. When the audio ended, I closed my eyes and felt the entire station shrink around me. The air felt heavy, like some part of that place was breathing with me. And if you're still here, listening to this story, you probably already know. Things are going to get worse. So before I continue, go ahead and hit the like button, because from here on out, you'll understand why I never went back to the ice. The night of the encounter started differently. There was no wind, no constant groan of metal plates. It was like the whole world had held its breath. I was sitting in the main room, going over reports I couldn't really read anymore. My eyes moved over the lines, but my mind kept repeating the same thought. Something is going to happen tonight. A little after midnight, the lights flickered. Just once. But in Antarctica, that's enough to freeze anyone. It meant something outside had interfered, and nothing outside was supposed to be moving. The others were already asleep. I stood up slowly, walked to the front door's small window, and looked out into the absolute dark. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps this time. A kind of sliding, as if something moved with its whole body, without joints. The sound came from the side of the station, getting closer. And then it stopped, exactly beneath the corridor window. I felt the floor vibrate ever so slightly, like some huge weight was adjusting itself there. The silence grew so deep I could hear my own blood in my ears. And then the voice spoke. It wasn't my voice repeated. It wasn't any of the previous attempts. This time, it sounded more natural, like it had finally found the right tone. "Here, you..." Only it wasn't quite that. It was almost like a direct translation of intention, not language. Something like, "I've found you." I took a step back, and at that exact moment, the creature responded by taking a step forward, matching my timing with absolute precision. But there was no sound of a footstep. Nothing. The ice didn't protest. The floor didn't shake. It was as if that body had no real weight. When I reached the end of the corridor, the window behind me turned white for a second. But it wasn't light. It was vapor, as if something enormous had exhaled against the glass. I turned slowly. The shadow was there. Tall, very tall. Too tall to be human. You couldn't see a clear shape, just an outline, a distortion of darkness within the dark. And then came the second voice, mine, but perfect, with the exact tone I used when talking on the radio when I was too tired to fake cheerfulness. "Open door." I froze, my breath locked in my chest. Every part of me wanted to run, but my legs felt glued to the floor. The thing repeated, now in fluent English, not learned, reproduced. "Let me in." And the worst part, it wasn't a threat, it was a request. As if it believed it had the right to come in. In that moment, everything in me wanted to give in. I can't explain it. It wasn't hypnosis or trance. It was like the voice, my voice, had been calibrated to sound familiar, almost comforting, and that was what scared me most. Something out there believed that by speaking like me, it could make me open the door. As if humans worked like this. Tone plus memory, trust, cold calculation, wrong conclusion. I finally managed to move when I heard the metal window frame crack slightly, as if it were just beginning to be pushed inward. It wasn't brute force, it was a test, the same way everything had started weeks before. I ran down the corridor, tripping over a toolbox, every muscle screaming inside my jacket. The air felt thick. Behind me, the sound returned, not footsteps, but that impossible sliding. Organic enough to not be a machine, wrong enough to not belong to any animal on Earth. I crossed the main room and went into the maintenance compartment, where we kept the escape door to the external platform. It was a heavy, rigid door that we only opened for emergencies. And at that moment, I couldn't think of a better word for what was happening. As I locked the door behind me, I heard something I've never forgotten. Don't run. Now the voice was human, completely human, as if it had trained on all my previous breaths and finally nailed the rhythm. But I understood. It wasn't a plea, it was an observation. The thing was realizing that I wasn't reacting the way it expected, and that seemed to confuse it. I ran down the platform. The snow hit my face like needles, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. The sky was a solid block of black, no horizon, no direction. I just ran, following the dim glow of the posts that led to the atmospheric module, where I knew there was another. Way out to the open field, the station shrank behind me, and that's when I heard it, coming from 3 different directions. My name. Each voice with a slightly different nuance, each one in the right rhythm, like parallel versions of myself, trying to find which one matched my reaction. There, in the middle of nowhere, with that sound multiplied in absolute darkness, I finally understood. That thing had no real form of its own. Form was optional. The voice was learned. The interest was observation. And whatever was following me that night was not from this earth. But it understood the human pattern of vulnerability very well. I went back to the United States a few weeks later, when the rotation finally came. I didn't tell anyone anything. Not in the report, not in the post-expedition debriefs. People who work in Antarctica already carry strange stories, lights, sounds, mirages, and I didn't want to be the scientist who lost his credibility for talking too much. But the truth is, I haven't been the same since that night. The years passed. I got married, had kids, then grandkids. Life went on. But now and then, on very quiet nights, when the air in the house feels still in a way it shouldn't, I catch myself remembering that. Let me in? It wasn't a threat. It was curiosity. Like it was trying to understand what we are. Like it wasn't imitating a human. It was studying one. Today, looking back, I think the scariest part wasn't the voice, or the shadow, or the certainty that it didn't come from this planet. What haunts me most is the feeling that I wasn't the first, and maybe I wasn't the last. If this story kept you hooked until now, hit the like button. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. And to make sure you don't miss the next video, turn on the notification bell.